Hi. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a table setting for Pride and Prejudice, a little something to help you with as you start in. The This book is about especially one young woman, but really also her sisters, looking for love, looking for the right guy. So in that sense, it's a very universal theme. Um, they're also doing something under circumstances that are a little different than the circumstances all of us know about. Um, which is that not only they're looking for love, but they're also looking for some kind of safe support in life. The Bennett family is in a legal bind, which gets referred to in the book, but that most of you probably won't understand because it's not something that happens now. Um, their father's estate, so their home and all the property and all the income that they get from the property and all of that, their father's estate has an entail on it, entail, or sometimes called an entailment. And that's a legal setup that used to happen in aristocratic places, saying that an entire estate would be left to a single male heir, usually the oldest son. And remember, Mr. Rochester was a younger son and wasn't going to inherit anything, but then his older brother died, and that's how he became rich. Well, that wasn't an unusual system because in the old, if you go back into the Middle Ages and stuff like that, a family would be really worried about maintaining its power by having all of its resources concentrated on one head of the family. And it would be assumed that that should be male because that's who fights and that's who makes a way, who defends his family out in the world. And if you were a younger brother, if you were sisters who didn't get, unmarried sisters or anything like that, that the heir would be expected to take care of you, as much as was necessary. And that would be sort of part of the code of being who he was. But in response, he has all the legal heft. So people would put in their wills, from generations on back, an entail saying that this property has to go to a single male heir. And the Bennets have 5 daughters and no sons. So that means when Mr. Bennett dies, the property is going to go to the nearest male relative, who is a cousin they don't even know, named Mr. Collins. You'll meet Mr. Collins in the novel. And so, that's a scary prospect. They have a comfortable home and status in society for as long as their father lives, but if anything happens to him, they got nothing. And it's not as if women in those days could go to college and find a career, could start a business, the only jobs available to an unmarried female is being a governess, which would have meant a big drop on the social ladder for the Bennett girls. That's what Jane Eyre did, but she was born considerably farther down the ladder than the Bennett girls, and it would have been a humiliation for them. Otherwise, you can be a servant or a seamstress or something like that and make pennies, or you can be a prostitute, and that was so. These girls are all looking at pretty unattractive situations if they don't find a husband. So they have 2 things to do at once. They want to find love, especially people like Elizabeth and Jane who have hearts or who are sensitive people who don't want to, who are not the sort of person who would marry someone they don't love or at least don't respect. You'll see that comes up with one of Elizabeth's friends who makes a decision like that. So they want to find, these particular women want to find someone to love, but their mother and their entire society, there's this reality they need to find a man to provide for them. So they need to find a husband. And these 2, what you hope is that you can find a husband who you can love, but there's an economic necessity to find a husband. And there's, it's the sort of thing that at least if some of the daughters marry well, then if their sisters don't marry, they could live with them and stuff people would have would have shelter and, some kind of social position. But somebody has to find a husband, and hopefully a husband who has the means to take care of everyone. So those two things are going at the same time. Finding a husband is about love and about money, and it's all intertwined. Okay, so I keep that in mind as you read this book, and you can see that for some characters, finding love matters more, and for some characters, finding a safe haven, and a secure living situation matters more, and that's part of, I think, how you're supposed to know who these characters really are, is what their priorities are. The characters in this social class in this novel would be horrified by the idea of working. That's not what aristocratic English people did. And obviously we feel very differently about that. We tend to, even rich people, we sort of expect them to do something with their lives. The English people in the early 1800s didn't think that way. Work kind of sullied you. Work made you, work lowered you. Okay, it made you into a drone. It made you into somebody desperate and pushy and ill-mannered and kind of socially obnoxious. That's pretty much how they would have thought about it. So, that's part of the idea of an aristocratic world. The people you really want to know are people who don't have to sully themselves with work. But arranging a livelihood when you don't work can get pretty darn complicated, and it's much more complicated for a woman. You'll see that men who are high class but don't have an inheritance they can live on can do things like join the army. The army, that comes up quite a bit. They can buy a commission. A friend would buy a commission for them, or their family would buy a commission, and they could be officers in the army, which is a pretty weird way to run an army, because just because somebody can buy a commission doesn't mean you would really want to be taking orders from them. But that was how it worked. And also the same thing with the Navy. It was a respectable thing to become a clergyman. Mr. Collins becomes a clergyman in the Church of England. A notch below any of those jobs would have been being someone like a doctor or a lawyer, especially a lawyer, because the doctors didn't have a great reputation because they really couldn't cure very much in the early 1800s. It was all wing and a prayer. Lawyers mattered, and Mrs. Bennet has two brothers who are lawyers. And they are well-to-do and gentlemanly, which is an important adjective in this book. But especially one of them is someone that a gentleman can talk to with pleasure, and that's a real compliment to him, considering that he, works. But the fact that Mrs. Bennet has two brothers who work, who are lawyers, lowers them on the social scale and makes the Bennet girls sort of not as good a catch as young women with more respectable relatives. Okay, this is all how it works. See, there's this marriage market, and your status in the market depends entirely on where you were born and how much money you've got. And the Industrial Revolution hasn't really kicked in yet, so we don't have people getting rich from things other than land. It's the great landowning families, and also the smaller landowning families like the Bennets, who have the social status. Okay, so it's a book about finding a husband, but there are two motivations working at once, and you'll see how they play out through these characters. And then there's the question, what makes someone a good husband? Because remember also, they have one shot at this. You don't get divorces in this world. You kind of can't. It would take an act of parliament to get a divorce. And, you'd have to be awfully important. And then it's probably no one would ever speak to you because, it was such a disgrace. So your whole life, especially if you're a woman, really your whole life for either sex, but even more so if you're a woman, depended on choosing your husband well, and getting lucky enough to get a good one. There were no do-overs. All right, so there you go. Just trying to set things up for you. I hope you enjoy yourselves reading this. I hope you get into it. And if you're having trouble getting into it, talk to me. Talk in class, in my office hours, whenever. I'll lower any obstacles I can for you with this book. All right. Take care.